SITREP World Briefing for June 1, 2026. The United States said it carried out strikes on Iranian military targets around the Strait of Hormuz, hitting radar and other military sites in Iran after what U.S. officials described as aggressive Iranian actions. The reported targets included positions in Goruk, Iran, and on Keshem Island, Iran, two locations tied to the narrow waterway that handles a large share of the world's seaborne oil trade. The military action unfolded as regional governments reported a widening pattern of attacks linked to the confrontation around the Gulf. Kuwait said it had intercepted missile and drone attacks. At the same time, the strikes landed while President Donald Trump was reportedly tightening the framework of a draft deal meant to formally end the Middle East war and reopen the strait after weeks of negotiations. Israeli forces captured Beaufort Castle in southern Lebanon, and video showed an Israeli flag flying over the medieval hilltop site after the takeover. Israel described the fortress as a strategic position because Beaufort sits high above surrounding territory and has long been associated with control of southern Lebanese approaches. By physically occupying the castle and publicly displaying the flag, Israeli forces turned the seizure into both a battlefield move and a political signal about their willingness to hold prominent terrain inside Lebanon. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israeli forces would push deeper into Lebanon after the military took Beaufort, calling the move a dramatic shift in the campaign against Hezbollah. The operation was meant to mark a new phase rather than a limited raid, especially because Beaufort is not only a fortified medieval landmark, but also a position with a long military history in Israel-Lebanon fighting. The seizure indicated a readiness by Israel's leadership to advertise territorial gains in southern Lebanon and to present those gains as part of a broader escalation against Hezbollah's presence near the border. Israeli forces seized the medieval Beaufort Castle in southern Lebanon on Sunday and raised an Israeli flag over the hilltop fortress, marking a deeper military advance across the border area. France reacted by requesting an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council and issuing a strong condemnation of the operation. The castle overlooks strategic terrain in southern Lebanon, and its capture gives the Israeli military a prominent observation point in a zone that has long figured in confrontations involving Israel, Lebanon, and armed groups operating near the frontier. France's move at the UN highlights the diplomatic weight Paris still assigns to Lebanon, a former French mandate where it has often tried to play a stabilizing role during regional crises. By calling for the Security Council to convene after the seizure of Beaufort Castle, French officials signaled that they see the Israeli advance as a development with wider implications for border security, civilian safety, and the risk of a broader interstate escalation. Beaufort Castle has military and political importance because of its commanding position above the Litani River region and the routes linking southern Lebanese towns. Control of the fortress has shifted repeatedly over decades of conflict, and its latest capture revives memories of earlier invasions and occupations in southern Lebanon. That history helps explain why France quickly escalated the matter to the Security Council. Beyond the immediate battlefield significance, the seizure carries symbolic force in a conflict where territorial moves, flags raised over landmarks, and international responses can each shape the next stage of diplomacy and military planning. Polling stations opened across Ethiopia on Monday in a national election expected to rid Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's Prosperity Party to power. Voting took place in Addis Ababa and other participating areas, but the election was overshadowed by conflict, instability, and the fact that not all Ethiopians were able to cast ballots. The restricted scope of the vote has sharpened questions about representativeness in Africa's second most populous country. Abiy Ahmed, who came to power in 2018, has since governed through a period marked by war, ethnic violence, and disputes over federal authority. That background shaped Monday's vote, with opposition activity muted and several areas affected by insecurity or political disruption. The expectation of a landslide for the Prosperity Party reflects both the weakness of its challengers and the uneven national conditions under which the election was held, with entire communities, effectively excluded from participation. The stakes extend beyond the result in Addis Ababa, because Ethiopia's domestic stability affects the Horn of Africa, Nile Basin politics, and the security of neighboring states. A victory for the Prosperity Party would strengthen Abiy's claim to continue centralizing authority and directing post-war reconstruction, but it would not resolve the grievances exposed by recent fighting and contested regional politics. Monday's election served both as a test of the government's ability to organize a national vote and as a measure of how far Ethiopia still has to go before political competition can take place on fully equal terms across the country. Colombia's first-round presidential vote produced a runoff between right-wing candidate Abelardo de la Espriella and leftist Senator Iván Cepeda, according to initial results released on Sunday. De la Espriella finished first, while Cepeda followed closely behind. The result sets up a second round between a conservative contender and a figure from the Colombian left, giving voters a choice over security, the economy, and the direction of Petro's political legacy. The runoff outcome is significant because Colombia remains divided over how to confront armed groups, organized crime, and slow economic growth, while preserving the country's democratic institutions. De la Espriella has built his appeal on a right-wing profile, while Cepeda enters the second round with support from Petro's camp and the broader left. Their advancement means the campaign will now become a referendum on whether Colombians want a turn to conservative populism or a continuation of the current governing coalition's agenda. Runoff elections in Colombia often force alliances between fragmented political camps, and the period before the final vote is likely to center on endorsements, turnout, and which candidate can reassure moderate voters. Cepeda's presence in the runoff gives the left a chance to defend influence, while De la Espriella's first-place finish shows the strength of a law and order message on the right. With the top two candidates separated closely enough to keep the contest competitive, the campaign now shifts from a crowded first round to a head-to-head battle with national consequences. Brazilian health authorities isolated 2 patients and began monitoring them for possible Ebola infection after the travelers arrived from African countries and showed symptoms consistent with the virus. Officials said one of the 2 patients later tested negative, but the second remained under observation while health teams followed established containment procedures. Brazil's response matters beyond its borders because the country is South America's largest nation, a major air travel hub, and home to a large public health system that has long been central to regional disease surveillance. The suspected cases emerged as the outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo passed 1,000 suspected cases. Ebola is transmitted through direct contact with the bodily fluids of an infected person, and governments treat even unconfirmed cases with high caution because delays can sharply raise the risk of hospital transmission and wider spread. For Brazil, the immediate priority is to determine whether either patient is infected while reassuring the public that containment protocols, laboratory testing, and follow-up monitoring are already in motion. Sources and the full written briefing are available at sitrepbrief.com.